Live video. Here we go.
Hi. So the name, I only wrote the PowerPoint that I don't have, and because I can't show it. But we're going to try to guide along with that. The title of this is, somebody's probably looking at it. I wrote it, but I forgot it. So, so this is
Making science fiction
world building.
science fiction world building. Close enough. And the idea being, reality and using reality, or as much reality as we've got a handle on, to make it not only more grounded but more exciting. Drama usually arrives out of specifics, whether those are specifics of situation, resources, character, needs, things like that. So this is a case of making the environment, and an environment that might be populated by non-humans, giving it at least some of that same sense of groundedness. Before we start, one of my intentions to this is to actually use at least half the time as essentially a workshop, because I'm guessing that a lot of you here are here for a reason having to do with, you either want to know more or you want to see just what stupid things I say. I understand schadenfreude. I can understand that that might be the latter, but I'm going to hope that most of you are here for the former. And so what I'm going to want to do at the top is to take a quick survey of show of hands. Why would you say there are going to be 4 categories? I'm going to read them out first so that you can then wait for yours and a show of hands. Having to do with aliens and realistic exoplanets. Option 1, I don't know where to begin. I think I'm missing something. I want realism. I want to do something different. No rubber suit aliens, nothing like that. I want to do something different and unique. So, you've heard them. You know which one you fall into. Let's see a show of hands for I don't know where to begin. Wow, that's excellent. We can skip so much of this. I think I'm missing something. 1, 2, 3. Now it's like, do I want? Okay, I think it's. Let me tell you, that's a pretty good one because that's where I usually fall. Okay, I think I'm missing something. I want realism. Now we have a lot of hands. Okay, and I want to do something different. Okay, I want realism and I want to do something different. This is the advanced class. Don't know why I'm teaching it, possibly though, that whether you look at Publishers Weekly or Kirkus or Barnes & Noble's online, whatever else they may tend to think about my hard SF, they usually cite the reality of the alien environments and the aliens themselves. So I guess I fooled enough of the people enough of the time that they said those nice things about me, and now you will be able to report how much of liars they all are. So right at the top of this, there is one sort of reality we do need to establish right away that comes before anything that I'm going to talk about, or frankly, I think anything that probably anybody talking about writing should talk about, which is 100% faithfulness to how humans might plausibly act is essential to the believability of any and all fiction. Now, it doesn't mean you have to write that way, but if you set that aside, you are in the realm of a ROMP. Because what you basically, the thing that we are immediately going to reach in the narrative, other human beings interacting with other human beings, if the reality of their dynamics is suspended for the sake of the narrative, then you're kind of saying to your reader, and it's a funny thing to say, we're not worried about that. This is going to be drawn more broadly. It's going to be a parody. Expect things that are not that don't necessarily conform to what we would expect. And by the way, tons of careers have been built on that. Very, very successful careers by putting that aside. The important thing to do, though, is first of all decide which one you want to do, and maybe not which one you want to do, but where's your center of gravity? Is it closer to that? Let's suspend the laws of human dynamics, if you will. Or I really want to hold to the laws of human dynamics. Know at the outset which one of those you're probably going to depend on more as you write. Because the bottom line is, if you set that aside, the human dynamics thing, and you say, I want a ROMP, I want a parody, then actually you may not have to worry about a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here. Not because it's not worthwhile, but the bottom line is that if you've set a context which says, these humans are behaving like cartoon characters, more than real people, or they veer in that direction at time. People are not really going to be, you're basically saying, and don't please expect realistic assessments of planetary gravity. You're not going to be held to account for that. You're not going to be pushed up against that sort of judgment wall. So I'm not saying leave, but I'm saying that a lot of this will probably not be immediately and presently germane to you, okay? So now we've got that. I know why you're here, I think. And so this is a good point. If you can find the post that came up on 20 Books to 50K on Facebook on your phone, I'd like to go down, how many people have that available? Okay, so I'll tell you what, I'll just go over the review here, and for those of you who have it, follow along at home. A couple of statements to begin with, starting points. Realism is not the same thing as verisimilitude, is not the same thing as authenticity. And the really basic breakdown, and this is not me being a professor, although God help you all, I have been, and I will try not to slip into that mode. But it's important because, once again, this is something that's going to tell you how much of this stuff you want to put in. If you want realism, you're really going to have to do your homework, and you can't stray very far from what we know. Verisimilitude is the simulation of realism. It's apparent faithfulness to it, with some corners cut and not a lot of deep delve. Authenticity is just a vibe. And you can usually get authenticity simply by being consistent with whatever you set up, even if it does push a lot of boundaries. So, and realism, I have to say, God love you if you want to try it, but there's a reason we write books. And one of them is because reality itself doesn't usually order itself in a particularly pleasing fashion to both our short-term and long-term mentality and perception of the world. So I'm a big person for verisimilitude, by the way, and I've worked in games as well, and I will tell you that the marriage between verisimilitude and player or reader immersivity is very, very high. In that case, the master voice is the voice of the universe. If, however, what you're doing is authenticity, it gives you more room as the author to be the voice. You can make the sort of side snarky quips or the state that voice can sort of suddenly intrude into the environment and make some comments, which can be a huge time saver. But each one of these choices, whether you're looking for the real or you're looking for verisimilitude or authenticity, says something about the choice you're making, probably regarding narrative voice and about what should be in the environment to build that. In authenticity, you can have immersivity also, but the immersivity is charm me with your voice, author. We have an expert in the audience of that. That is Larry Correia. Larry Correia, when I'm reading a Larry Correia book, I'm like, I don't care if it's real. I'm charmed by the voice. The personality comes through, and that never lets me go. Immersivity in a hard science fiction environment, your voice shouldn't even be in there very much. But the universe has to constantly be saying in small ways, this is real, this has been thought out. If you poke a hole at the flat here, it's not going to go through paper like in a stage set. Actually, somebody did the work. Now, if you're smart, you don't trot out, you do not have to show your homework. As a matter of fact, please do not show your homework. If you know it, that confidence will translate immediately and directly and powerfully to your reader. You just have to. And every once in a while, you get an opportunity to either share it or, share your stuff and show off a little bit. So the first question is, which of these do you need? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at the most basic and go down to the most zoomed in. And there's a reason for that, because as we zoom in, it goes from knowledge bases to, if you will, author choices. And the knowledge bases will hopefully inform your author choices. So, if you're saying to yourself, the distinction really is between this is the way the world works, and that's reality. This is the way my world works, and that's really the sort of, you want to be able to answer that question. What does it mean for you for it to be your world working correctly? You're going to see something in there about techno-magic versus science. I'm going to skip right the hell over that. The basic version is machinery does not equal science. Science is science. If machinery only means that maybe there's some concern with science, but really very often it's a set dressing. The less the concern with realism or verisimilitude or authenticity there is, the more the science or the machinery is just there as this is the way we wanted to tell the story. You look at Star Wars, for instance, particularly the first movie. If you wanted to tell that with horses instead of grav speeders and steel swords instead of ones made of lighter plasma, the argument rages on, then you could do that. And there really is almost nothing in that. The Force is the wizards, blah, blah, blah. If you want to be working in science fiction, you do need to worry about some of this stuff. If all you're really doing is techno-fantasy, another out for you. Because if you think about the science of Star Wars, that's almost an oxymoron. So at any rate, that's that. Now, basic building blocks. I really want to get through these as quickly as I can. I'm going to actually read down a list instead of present these things. Because if everybody feels, I got that, I don't want to spend time covering it. That's a waste of your time, and then it has me talking, which is never a good thing. So the basic building blocks first. How many people feel fairly comfortable with these concepts? Conservation of matter and energy. You know, I'm going to do this another way. If you're not entirely sure, no shame, just put it up. Conservation of matter and energy. Okay, not entirely sure, fine. Action and reaction. Everyone's good with that? Okay. The way I say it, I'll explain it. Ex nihilo, nihilo. Ex nihilo is a okay. And this is possibly because it's Latin, but the basic notion there is out of nothing, nothing comes. The miracle, supposedly, of creation and things like that is ex nihilo, boom, everything. But when you get down to science, we don't observe that. What we observe in science is ex nihilo, nihilo. And that's an important thing to bear in mind, because that's one of the rules you're playing by when you're working with science. So, very quickly, conservation of matter and energy. This is basic Einsteinian stuff, which basically says you can actually sort of talk about matter and energy in the same equation, and you can shift how much is matter, and you can shift how much is energy, and you do it with different ways, and it has different costs. But at the end of the day, the sums should be the same. You cannot introduce more energy and mass into a system. It is already at its stated, if you will, limits. If you're actually then adding in something from outside, what do you have to do? You have to expand the box. It doesn't mean it came magically from nowhere, which is hence that ex nihilo distinction I made. It doesn't come from nowhere. Everything that's involved, everything that's in the frame, is therefore part of that conservation of matter and energy. Action and reaction, basic Newtonian physics, right? And it's how the pendulum works. I kick it that way, comes back. Usually about the same amount of energy. Same sort of thing, jump off a rowboat. You're going to go one way as you dive into the water, rowboat goes the other. You may not go the same distance, you may have different resistance to you. Water tends to be more resistant than air. But these are the basic building blocks. Anybody feel like we have to spend more time here? You say no. Okay, good. Now, did I mess up my page order before? Yes, I did. I put two down, but I can only afford one. Now lists that it's fine to raise your hand once again if you're not entirely sure, because that's what we're working with here. First, let's go to the big scope. If we're talking about now aliens and the planets upon which they evolve, let's start with stars. Everybody fairly familiar with stars' types, like their life cycle, how long they're stable? Yeah, we're good with that? All right, excellent. Radiation output and flares related to stars. People good with that? A little bit. Really quickly, the only thing you guys probably have to worry about, red dwarfs are by far the most common stellar class in the universe. It's, I think, like 82%. Everything else is deep pikers. There's only one little problem with red dwarfs, is that they tend to be smaller, and they tend to, therefore you have to get very close in order to get enough radiation from them to heat the planet. Problem one is they also tend to be flare stars, which means that, and it's not just like everybody on the surface is cooked. The real issue is that they throw out various forms of radiation which essentially strip parts of the atmosphere away. Some of the parts of the atmosphere that are going to be most important to you. So if you want to set something on a red star, do a little research into them. They are very plentiful, but they're not all necessarily very hospitable to what you're looking for. However, that can be a great source of problems. And if you want a dangerous environment that people have to be clever about, made for you, courtesy of the universe. This one is frequently overlooked. Is it a clean or cluttered system? By which I mean solar system. Everybody, does that one want some explanation? Okay, so our system is pretty clean. What I mean by that is you've got these, I grew up thinking there were 9 planets.
There are 9 planets.
Thank you very much. I still think that. It's, at first I thought that was the little voice in the back of my head, but then I realized it was deeper than mine. But we have a fairly clean system. In other words, there isn't a lot of junk. There's usually junk. There are junks preceding and and following each planet. Those are called the Trojan points. We don't need those. But in general, most of our asteroids and rocks are clustered in one belt between Mars and Jupiter, and then you've got the Kuiper belt beyond that, and the Oort cloud. Junk, 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 junk. But inside of space, in our area, it's pretty clean, by whatever measure you want. Now, if you decide that you want something, if you want to tell a tale of space pirates moving between different asteroid belts in a single system, if there are any planets there, anybody care to guess what's likely on those planets? You're going to have lots of craters, lots of bombardment. It's going to make the moon look like a billiard ball. And what that's going to mean is that the ability for life to persist, for atmosphere to be retained, and all those sort of things becomes a great deal more of a questionable proposition than it has been on our planet. However, once again, this could be a great opportunity. So, because remember, not everybody who's going to go into space, whether it actually happens or not, is going to probably get a chance to choose where they go. You're going to have people who are fleeing. You're going to have people who are shipwrecked. You're going to have all that sort of stuff. And certainly, Enemy Mine made great use of this. If you think about the film, really good use of this. Now, there's a term here which is probably, I thought I would have images, but I don't. Insulation in relation to face locking. What the hell did he say? Okay. Ex nihilo, let's go on. No. Okay, so insulation is simply a fancy term for how much total radiant energy is a planet getting from its primary star and additional stars that might be in the system. Because binary stars are quite common, and even trinary are not anywhere near as rare as we thought. So what does that have to do, therefore, with in relation to face locking? The closer a planet is to the star, the gravity of that planet ultimately sort of takes the wiggle out of it and locks it so that its face is always presented, one side of it is always presented to that stellar object. Now this can be offset. I won't go into the specifics except to say K-class stars, orange, if they have no moon, they will create what's called a habitable zone. The theory is to about, if you're a K2, you can do it without a moon. If the planet has a moon, the moon actually works against, or I should say natural satellite, moves against the effect of the sun and will tend to actually keep rotation going because now you've got two attractive forces. You got whatever the star is, but you got this other body over here. So every time this thing is saying, and now I will hold you locked, and the moon says, no, come talk to me a little bit. And it does. And so they think up to K7 for planets there. This is an example of it. So, and why is this important? Well, we'll get on to planets now, because we've handled everything we need to know about stars. Yeah. Okay, so you probably want, if you choose to have a planet with creatures vaguely like us, survive at the same temperatures, have anything like the same sort of metabolic processes we do, you're probably going to want something in what's called the Goldilocks zone. Everybody's heard that term, right? Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah. So you know what that is. That's that sweet spot that is, it's like Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. But once you're in there, there's another issue to deal with, which is, are you going to be able to keep your atmosphere? There's several things that bear upon that, but there's one other, which is, are you safe from radiation? One of the things that makes us safe from radiation is we have the hugest electromagnetic dynamo working on our side. That is the fact that we have a molten core of metal spinning. That puts out a field. That's largely what is keeping it's some of those effects are what we're seeing in the Northern Lights, the Van Allen radiation belt. You take away metal and spin, and you no longer have a dynamo, and you no longer have an electromagnetic shield. So if you are going to actually just have a solid core planet, be aware that you're basically saying this has taken a lot of pretty hard radiation as a result. Okay, so just be aware of that. So ex nihilo, right? So rotating or not is a big deal, and it's not just because it's constantly getting cooked on one side, but if it's not rotating at all, it has no way to equalize temperature. So in other words, if you think about rotation, getting heated from one side, right? Heating up, heating up, heating up. You rotate around because to the dark side, now there's no light coming in or no insulation. Haha, there we go. And now it's giving up that heat. So if you decide to have a planet going with a really fast rotational rate, its temperature is actually, it's going to show probably less day-night change. And if it takes a long time, oh, there's another problematic planet to be on. Ice every night, searing heat every day, because every day is like 52 hours long. That's not just a problem with what timepiece do I use. The most important thing, though, that I frequently see, everybody knows what gravity is, but gravity has a very important relationship to another one of these confusing terms, but it's a really important one. It is called, first the answer, then the question. How do you keep O2? How do you keep the thing we breathe? We're assuming that that's what we breathe, but we're getting there. Now, how do you keep O2? The answer is, what is that planet's minimum molecular retention? And you go, well, you mean it got held back in school? No, I don't. But what it does mean is that gravity has a relationship to free atoms, okay, to molecules. And so the question is, what can it hold? One of the reasons Mars, you can terraform Mars. It might stay that way for a little while, for a long while, given the way we think of things. But over time, I think it's 0.36 G. It's in the 0.3 family. That can't hold oxygen, and it certainly can't hold water. That is water vapor. It's going to lose it. It's going to come off the top of that atmosphere and eventually go back to what it can hold. That's why gas giants are made up largely of what they're made of. I mean, they've got everything in them. But when you get really low minimum molecular retention, you're looking at molecular hydrogen is what it can hold, and things like that. It's a micro atmosphere. And that's going to be very important, because if you don't have atmosphere and you don't have water, you can't breathe, you don't have humidity, you can't drink, obviously, some problems here. So now let's get down to life. And this is where we hit the tipping point between how do you do different worlds, how do you do different aliens. I'm going to say this, and you may have seen it already. Carbon's your daddy, and oxygen's your mom. Why is that? Well, because it's a funny thing about carbon. Carbon is an atom which actually interacts very well with other things. It can hold things, but it can give things up. It depends on the kind of energy put into it. That's very important, because if something doesn't hold on enough, there's no stability. If something holds on too much, there can be no metabolism, because there isn't enough allowance for change. The thing is that if you're going to have this thing that's capable of changing, a good building block, you need something that works as a transport mechanism. Well, it just so happens that at the same temperature, the carbon is sort of at its optimum mix of stability and activation. H2O is in its liquid state. That's what makes it, in many ways, the Hab zone. That's why O2 is created. That's why I would say that if you want to do something that's, you say, oh, there are silicon monsters on Star Trek, and I want cloud floaters in Jupiter. I say, go for it, but I say, you have a lot of homework ahead of you. Because if you want, depending on how close, that may be the moment where you want authenticity, in a sense, more than verisimilitude. Because the science of that is really hard. There have been all sorts of proposals, but no one really knows. The bottom line is that carbon, oxygen, inside that Hab zone, inside that Goldilocks zone, is going to, the creatures may look entirely different from us, but it's going to be the same building blocks. Do you have a question? Just stretch it.
Well, what about terraforming and populations outside the Goldilocks zone?
I'm doing that panel next year. Because now you're talking about, once we're done with the rules, how do we bend, break, or patch them? Which is a great topic, and I love it. And I like writing fiction in that environment, but I'm going to be realistic in mind. Yeah, you got it? Can I message you? Yeah, you sure can. Did you have a question? No, okay, that was a stretch, fine. So, what does it have to be life? If it doesn't have metabolic activity, it gets stuff in, it puts stuff out. It's hard to say that that's life, and certainly it's not going to be talking to people, right? Mobility, if it can't move, it's kind of borderline as a life thing, as a life qualification, I guess. These problems and differences in terms of how this is not like us, these sort of basic questions we're asking, any place you put in yeah, but what if in here, you have a story seed. And you have a story seed based in an exception or a problem to the shirt sleeve environment we have here. And this allows you to define it as something more than, oh, it's a dangerous planet out there. No, it's a dangerous planet because, and you will find that if there's one reason that it's dangerous at this level, before we get into actual life forms, then it's going to have more than one danger point. And that makes for lots of activity and lots of challenges to overcome. So, about these life forms, whatever they are, bear this phrase in mind. Form follows function. There's a reason that you don't see a whole lot of creatures living at the bottom of the sea with big legs who could compete in sprinting competitions. There's that saying, you know, it's as useless as legs on a fish. Yup. Form follows function. They're moving through a high resistance medium, water. They're shaped like a torpedo. Who came first, the torpedo or the fish? So that's another thing. And we're going to then, lastly, we get to intelligence, which I listed here as the last best hope for survival. Now, one of the things that Churchill has been attributed to him, the direct quote is, his question was about Yanks, said, "You can be sure Americans will do the right thing after they've tried everything else." I would say about evolution, sufficiently complex organisms will develop intelligence in order to survive after they've tried everything else, because intelligence is expensive. If you take a look at the shark. The shark is just almost perfection of evolution. Its ability to survive all the changes on this planet. You know, we're worried about a couple of degrees temperature one way or the other. I guess I'll change roll on. You know, they persist. And look at the size of their brain. A walnut, if that, when you get down to it. Higher and more complex organisms tend to be two things. Well, I'm not even going to get to that. I'm simply going to say that intelligence is costly to the organism. You take a look, ask any biologist, ask if you know 20Books, I'm sure you could get Robert Hampson to talk at great length about just how expensive a brain is. Now, that's just in terms of raw resources. How much blood, how much energy. Also, if it's going to be a decent range, take a look at, go from chordata, go to mammalia, go to the more complex mammals, and watch how gestation goes up, and then child rearing or young rearing time goes up. The higher up that level of complexity you go, the more you're investing in that brain. You would say, my God, that's a bad deal, right? And in some ways, it is. Take a look at what you give up. What did we give up in evolution that we're pretty sure we gave up?
Tails?
Probably gave up tails. Not sure what we did with them, but probably balanced us well when we were climbing. Anything else? Fur? Yep, without doubt. Anything else?
Canines.
Canines got shortened. How about the incredible speed advantage of a quadruped? But we had to give it up to get the special prizes. The 10 special prizes. The things with which you can climb better, even if you take more damage. These are pretty manipulable critters here. And then there's that wonderful scene. If you haven't seen the opening of 2001, go see it, because it does so completely and well what it would take me way too long to do. But this stuff allows you to make from opportunistic tools to purposeful tools to clearly shaped tools. And in that scene, the first weapon, the thing that kills another one of the proto-humans, is thrown up in the air, and in one smash cut, it turns into an orbital nuclear silo. First weapon, the last weapon, one cut. It's worth that cinematic moment. And that's what the advantages are, but the costs. Every other species, if they got to intelligence, probably had to obey the same law. This was the last best chance for us to survive. What did they give up? Because that's going to be there are going to be instincts they have, which just like ours, probably are a little bit, they're outdated. Because millions of years shaped not only our physical forms, but the social forms that our physical forms sort of compelled us to adapt. So what would they have? They're going to have the same sort of, because this is, I haven't said this yet, but Tonstoffel, whether it's physics, or whether it's biology, or whether it's sociology, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Thank you, Robert Hyman. So, here are some of the things you want to ask now that you've said this is the planet, here's the environment, here's how it's different, here's why it's more dangerous, less dangerous, etc., etc. Here's the species. What was its dawn of intelligence moment? Why did it have to evolve intelligence to survive? Once you've answered all that stuff, then how does your species interact with the world? By which I mean, What senses does it depend on? You think that, well, the same ones we have, really? We split up the electromagnetic spectrum into at least two parts: audio, visual, and then there's the visual. Then there's the part of the spectrum we can't see. What if they have one intake? Now that's going to change everything. They won't have any metaphors. You know, it's like, I see what you're talking about, which is sort of like saying, I have a completely epiphanic moment. I understand all things. It's not limited. Their entire way of viewing the world would be incredibly different. Or they might have multiple sensors, each of which are coded to bandwidths, so that you don't have eyes and ears. You just have different sensitivity plates, and they measure that way. So how does it communicate, and why? How is that best for its survival? Now, one of the first things you can do is take a look at that first decision you made about how it senses and interacts with the world. Because my guess is the sense of intake is going to have something to do with communication. You know, it's like, well, this is how I learn what the environment is like. Maybe I should signal to my own kind using that same sensory apparatus. And also, what will allow transmission? There are some things I'm leaving aside here. For instance, if an organism is not relying strictly on the sort of biochemical impulses we do, its exchange may be very different, which actually gets over into spooky science. That's the panel I'll do 3 years. Does it fashion tools? You'd think, well, naturally, except for, I don't know, not necessarily that it would or would have to. And for instance, think about what if, you see a lot of scientists these days saying, we think octopi might be from other planets, at least they act that way. And think about the difficulty of an oceanic, pardon me, yeah?
What did you just say?
Oh, that octopi are from another planet, or ought to be, because they are so different in so many aspects of their makeup and their reactions. Think about one of the things that would stand in the way of an octopus becoming a tool-using species, even though it has all of these manipulable things. How do you forge metal? How do you do that?
Heat.
Yeah, underwater. Volcanic vent. Where do you think they have their cities? Already, we're making a story of an alien species. And I'm not kidding you. I'm absolutely not kidding you. All of these challenges are the starts of seeds of things. So, I already talked about that. Outdated. Yep. Okay. The takeaway: don't focus on getting the full knowledge of this. There's too much. There always will be. Rather, I would suggest you concentrate on developing the habit of asking questions as you develop this, and you always drill down one layer more. It's a very rewarding journey, but it's also a journey that doesn't allow you to do this thing that I've seen way too many writers do. I'm not done with my research. Yeah, you are. Write your damn story. By not trying to learn everything, but by finding this thing that's an opportunity, drilling into it, getting to the next level where you say, now I don't know about this. Drill down into that. Get as far down as it seems. If you're doing verisimilitude, you'll have to go further. If you're doing authenticity, you don't have to go as far. So that's all I'm going to do. I don't know how much time we have left.
We have about 12 minutes.
Questions? General? Particular to your own worlds? Fire away. Yes, go ahead.
Would it be possible to have a planet that's entirely water?
Sure. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, they think they've already detected some.
Really?
Yeah. And you get that because radio spectroscopy, which is really, we don't see these planets. We see emitted, or usually in the case of planets, obviously, reflected light. We hope to. And the pattern of reflection we get back tells us largely what's there. And if there's no land masses, that we are guessing certain things about what that means about an atmosphere and what that would mean about the surface. So there's every suspicion for that. But you know, if you have another question or follow-up, I'll stay around after. Okay? Another person? Really? Yeah, go ahead.
I just don't want to take anybody's turn because I get asked a lot of questions.
Well, you get one.
So,
Okay.
So, like a lot of science fiction readers, I've read a lot of David Webber, obviously, and
Uh-huh.
honored, it's always awesome. But I always found the fact that she was tall from a high G world to be a little weird. And now, looking at, in my own writing, I have a high G world with a high pressure atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's really difficult to do that kind of research without having a degree in biology or atmosphere, stuff like that. But my assumption would be is that with a higher higher gravity and a higher atmosphere, you would get shorter people with larger necks and shoulders. Would that be about right?
Well, let's put it like this. That is probably a governing consensus, but I think when you're talking now over evolutionary time.
Well, it would be a planet that would be colonized for about 300 years.
That's still a drop in the bucket,
Yeah, right.
evolutionary time.
Yeah.
But what would happen is there would probably be very specific medical problems to that community. I mean, if they didn't get heavier bone structure, if they didn't have a lower center of gravity, let me tell you, they would have legs like a 30-year infantryman by the time they were like 16.
Right, yeah.
So I think those are the sort of things I would do. Now, in the long arc, you might indeed find that would happen. I forget in David's universe if there's genetic amelioration, and that is, I think, probably what's going on there. However, and Tony says your bibliography knowledge is flawed, but you're right, because I can count on a good science fiction writer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's their word. There were set of biological models too.
Mhm.
That explains.
Yeah. Yep. And by the way, finding out about that atmosphere, I'm going to point you at a game. It's called 2300 AD. 2300 AD has a table. You'd have to get it through Mongoose Publications now. It was harder science fiction than Traveler by far. And one of the things that it
Traveler
did
was
was,
pretty awesome.
yeah, I worked on it for a while. So that's not why it was awesome. I was the downfall. But the thing is, it gives you the molecular retention table of all the major gaseous elements, and you can see right away why things would have, the ability to hold on to what they hold on to, and you can guess at some of the compositional elements. Yes, Beth?
This is a commercial. There's a new Traveler novel out from Mark Michael that we published last year.
Mark Miller?
Mark Miller.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mean, because I know he's working on another one, do you mean Agent of the Imperium?
I do. Yes.
Agent of the Imperium, go get it. Mark is a super guy. Mark actually wants to find a way to make the Kane universe work as a traveler deviation, if you will. And we've been talking about for about 5 years. See, this is why you go to cons. Business being done right in front of you. But so that was your question. Other questions? Come on, you all probably are writing a world or a game or something like that. You want to figure something out. Yeah, I see.
So, plausibility of like a livable exoplanet outside the range of time dilation orbiting a neutron star singularity with an accretion disk, would there be enough heat and radiation to sustain it?
It's been lovely seeing you guys. No, that looks like this. I don't know. I would that would be the sort of thing. First thing I would do is see how much headway I could make on my own. I don't think it would be much. And then I would get on the phone or on email to I can think of 4 or 5 of the people I know through Sigma and say, guys, what do you think of this? Which is what I did with, as a matter of fact, my shift drive. Because I wanted to make sure that a physicist says, doesn't break any laws, which is important. It drives through certain unspecified terrains, but that's different than breaking laws. So I don't know the answer to that, but there are a bunch of other sort of related ones. I think the idea of anything that's, now you're talking about a body that's existing to such a radiation source. You're talking about a kind of life form that would have to be able to do the following. As a matter of fact, that might be where silicon would come in. There'd be such a high activation energy from the constant bombardment, it might actually be able to work there. It might, because silicon is in the same table, the same line on the chart, the elemental chart, as carbon, but its activation needs to be a lot higher, which is to say hotter or whatever, to be able to give things up and take things in. So this might be where you would find a silicon life form. So maybe I did answer your question. That's creepy. Okay, another question. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, in my world, I have what I call near humans.
Okay.
And my idea is that, humanity went out to colonize other planets. And in the beginning, there was it took forever to get to these planets, which means these colonies were isolated for an extended period of time and then slowly veered off with evolution.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes,
And
yeah.
what am I looking at time-wise? I mean, how long would have they had to, thousands of years?
This is a great question, but everything and this is not so much as a direct line logical path, and anybody who says so, I think, is trying to oversell it. But if you take a look what anthropologists and archaeologists find, and observations we've done on species in the fossil record, there is some, I think you can probably say this: when tool use is involved, at the evolution, the self-evolution impacts are jumped by probably at least an order of magnitude more. Because if you take a look at what fossil records we have, what records we have in general that humans left 40,000 years ago, and how much they change in 30,000 years to the late Paleolithic, it's pretty significant when you get right down to it, and certainly in social forms. In social, what we don't know is how much hair did we have? When did we start giving that out? And my guess is a lot faster than others, because the bottom line is we can make fire, we look for shelter. There's a whole bunch of things that we're doing at the same time, which are saying we're changing our environment, and certain forms are selecting. Now, after this, if you want to talk about Lysenkoistic genetics, I will be happy to do so. But the quick version of this is, it's thought that natural selection is just what survives better. But with the understanding of epigenetics and the ability of methylation of the genes to actually sort of, they found, for instance, the Israelis did a study that rats that had absolutely no experience of trauma in their life, if they came from a mother that was highly traumatized right up to the point of impregnation and then delivery, they were atypically neurotic. And they tracked this back to methylation of the genes. Now at that moment, you have to say that the simple Darwinian model, okay, 900 black rabbits and 2 in the Arctic, the 2 survive, and eventually they will pass on and become the great rabbit dominators of the Arctic. There's a movie that shouldn't be made. But at any rate, this actually says that it can possibly be jump-started. And we don't begin to know all the mechanisms that may be involved. And this is a playground for you. Another question, yes?
Do you have any recommendations for places to begin research on things like on these stages that you recommended that we all consider? The planets, the star systems, stars. Where do we go to start doing our research for ourselves? Do you have any suggestions?
There are some questions that are very quick to ask and very long to answer. And because the answer is, you're not going to find, there are 2 things you're looking for, which is, where is the really good work being done? And where are you going to find a presentation of it that you don't have to have an advanced degree, postdoctorate, to be able to understand it? And that requires some spade work, absolutely. My suggestion to you, are you a writer, game designer, what, writer? I would suggest to you something that I kind of pointed to earlier, which is, decide which of these problems you want to set for yourself. Let the others come in peripherally as it will. Drill down on that one. And you're probably going to find that it will also begin to impact your perception of what the dramatic arc is going to be, what the conflicts are going to be, and et cetera. And then some of these things are not going to be meaningful, right? So don't bother with them. And others you're going to bounce into. It's like, oh, they keep on talking about the gaseous composition of the atmosphere. I guess I'd better look at that. Well, there's your next crusade. But don't bring in too many. And every time you do it, you've got more colors on your palette just from having been there before. How are we doing on time?
We got 2 minutes.
I got one question. I have no questions. I exhausted the room. I terrified them. Who? Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm not quite sure how to ask this or narrow it down, but can you address really rapid travel through the galaxy? Like in Star Wars, they've got warp 10, and it's like, if that's 10 times the speed of light, it's still going to take them 100 years to get where they say they're going.
Actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was some sort of logarithmic scale. It was a hell of a lot more than 10 times the speed of light.
But
yeah.
How do you make that kind of rapid travel realistic to your readers without?
Okay, I can answer that.
Science
the science, we have to leave the science aside, because that's what I'll do 5 years from now. But the thing about that is that as long as it's costly and consistent, readers will tend to believe it. I would say that there should be limits on it. There can be whatever limits you want, but have an explanation in your mind that makes sense to you.
Right.
why it has those limits, and then take a look and see, just read science. You're probably going to find yourself looking at relativity, quantum effects, string theory, spooky action at a distance, all that sort of stuff, wormholes, event horizons. If that list of terms will give you some grounding, it may just simply provide wowing terms for a very complex polonium, or it may actually give you some theory that says this is roughly what's going on behind that. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
Are we out of time?
That's it.
There we go. Thanks for coming.